Okay. So the format, Chad, is casual conversation. Um, the goal here is simply to pull some clips out from this that we think will be interesting to folks on LinkedIn. So we just normally just pull some clips out and post those. So
Okay.
I don't think you have met Patrick, right?
I don't think so.
You know what? So many people. We might have met, and if we did, you were probably very cordial, and it was a great meeting. But just in case,
Well, let's see. Patrick was with us at ASCII Toronto, so it's
so
certainly a
it's like it's entirely possible. Like
Yeah.
those types of events. It's just too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you got an award at that ASCII event. Is that right?
At that event, I did. I got recognized for, I don't know, being in ASCII for 100 years or something like that. And then I wasn't there to collect it, but if you guys were at the Philadelphia event, I won Partner of the Year.
Maybe that's what I was thinking of. We were there. Yeah, we were there. And that was awesome. That's what I was trying to remember.
But I did in Toronto. I did get some stuff in the Toronto event as well. It was but yeah, not that. They waited till the end of the year to announce that.
I think that's kind of what kind of reminded me that, hey, you'd be a good person to get on a podcast. So let's start there. Let's do a quick introduction. So Chad, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Fast Computers, how long you guys have been in business, where you based, all that.
Yeah, sounds great. So Fast Computers is now in its 27th, going into its 28th year of business. I founded the company myself. For the first probably 7 years, it was, I was the IT guy, the consulting, whatever you want to call it. I was that guy, right? You got to start somewhere. And made lots more mistakes. 12. Actually, I was 15. I was 15 when I started the company.
Wow. I wasn't too far off, to be honest.
No, I was 15. I remember I had this dental office, and we were overhauling everything. They were running. I can't think of the name of the software right now, but they're Dentrix. They're running Dentrix. And so we were putting in a new server, new workstations, new monitors, which of course back then were CRTs. So, they were big. And my mom drove me in her minivan over to the clients, and I unloaded everything on the curb and said, "Thanks, Mom. I'll probably be about 6 hours. Can you come pick me back up?"
You could get a dentist to let you install servers and other compute back when you're
I was there were I remember I had a couple people that were like, "I'd love to do business with you, but I can't sue you yet, so come back in a couple of years." And but you know what? You know what though? I for a long time I downplayed that sort of stuff and I focused more on the here and now. But I mean, it's been so long now that I kind of have fun with some of these old stories because there was some of those people in those early days that took a chance. Obviously, some people thought they were probably saving some money, working with me as opposed to, XYZ Corp. But on the flip side, some of them, at the end of the day, that's their business. That was their livelihood. So they took a chance on me. Obviously, it worked out, or I wouldn't still be doing this. But those people are what really enabled me to, continue going on. So if we fast forward a bit from the really early days, around 2005, 2006, I decided I kind of had a little bit of a sit and think moment, and I decided, I don't really want to be a computer guy, a self-employed guy forever. I want to build a business. And so I hired my first employee around then, and we got a brick and mortar location, and started making some more mistakes. And when I say mistakes, I mean, we weren't making the kind of mistakes that were detrimental to anybody else. They just weren't very profitable. I remember one time I had this whole business unit, and one of my employees was like, "Is this like a business, or is this like just your hobby, this hosting thing?" Because I was making some questionable decisions as far as ROI and things like that. I was like, no, this is how it should be because this is better, and it was, but it wasn't a good business move. So anyway, we did that, and we're really down memory lane here. But fast forward a bit, 2006, something like that. We had tested at Kaseya, at Enable, and we were really kind of getting into the whole managed services in the SMB space when it didn't exist, installing SBS boxes and things like that. And one of my favorite times in business was probably somewhere between 2009 and 2012, where we were doing SBS 2008 and SBS 2011. I loved the simplicity of it. Go in, clients were typically at a point in their career where they were paying us because they wanted life to be easier. We weren't talking about all the stuff we talk about now with ransomware and all the threats, obviously, where you guys fit in. But it was, we put in a server, maybe 2 firewall switches, access points, backup. It was simple. We managed it. It was a flat monthly fee. We were doing that back then too. I loved it. Fast forward to now, we make a lot more money now. There's a lot more money in the industry, but it's a lot more stress, a lot more to think about. So, and now we're at, sitting at, what are we at right now? 10 FTEs. We've been up to 12. Yeah, we're trying to realistically, honestly, it's the right people are really what's holding us back on the growth side right now. We can't take on more work than we can handle. But anyway, that's where we're at now, and having a good time.
That's great. And I know, but you're based out of the Toronto area, right?
Yeah. We're just about an hour and a half west of Toronto. As you're well aware, the geo these days is less important than it used to be. So we still have lots of local businesses, but we've been able to spread our wings a bit.
So I was going to ask you that. What are the regions you serve?
So most of our clients are in Ontario, but we have clients across Canada. We have a handful in the States. We actually had a separate corp stood up in the States, but we've wound that down a bit. And we have a couple overseas in Europe. Those are mostly branch offices of clients from over here, but they have to operate semi-independently. So
neat.
And I think we got to know you. I don't mean to embarrass you, but you're kind of known as an influencer in the Toronto region for MSPs. I guess because you are that guy who's been around for a while. I want to rewind a little bit. You mentioned SPS. For those who don't know, tell us about SPS and
SBS.
SPX. I don't know. So what is SPS?
Small business server.
Small business server. Thank you. Yeah. Then I actually also have the. You remember that very brief? They had the medium business server. I forget exactly. Yeah, I actually have a shirt with that on it. But basically, so small business server was Microsoft breaking all of their best practices by putting everything on one server, or maybe 2 if you had advanced back down to 3. And essentially, what it was it was your file, print, email, SharePoint. So you had literally everything on one server. I don't mean one VMs. I mean one server. It was a bit of a hot mess in some regards, but it was targeted at businesses that were, say, 5 to 25 seats. I think went as high as 50, I think. It was great, though, because, you were able to get in there and, back then, obviously, virtualization wasn't really a thing. So physical hardware, if you were doing it the enterprise way, you were talking like a lot of hardware costs. And so this was a way to get in with one server. And these businesses that didn't have this stuff before, you got them, proper email. They were, who knows what they were doing, their web host email or something. Of course, the idea of putting on-prem email in an office behind a cable modem now sounds crazy, but at the time it was a really good idea and it worked really well. So that was SBS, and we sold a ton of that.
It is so interesting because I didn't know about that, but it is so interesting to think about today. If you're starting a new business, not an MSP, but you're just starting a new business, right? Well, what do you need? Maybe you can answer that question. When you're starting a new business, what do you actually need from a digital, services point of view?
No, it's a terrific question. The big change here is that now, instead of focusing on the technology, we're focusing more on the identity, protecting the identity, and then everything else comes behind it. So if I was starting a new business, making widgets tomorrow or some kind of service business, most important thing is to get, we're a Microsoft shop, so I'm going to have a bias here, but Microsoft 365, business premium. And then you're going to get a handful of identity management tools out of the box. And anything less than that, in my opinion, is a very bad idea. But I think, things like...
Explain what you mean by identity management for everyone.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So you have Entra ID, or Active Directory is what it used to be called. And instead of having an on-prem version like you would have in the past, where you run on-prem Active Directory and make all your users locally, you're making them in the cloud. And that in of itself is quite simple. But then where it becomes more important is how that's managed and how it's controlled. So with Business Premium, you're getting things like conditional access. So you can say the users can only log into the service if they meet certain criteria, whether it's geolocation or whether it's more particular than that. You can really get granular. And the idea here is that all the other services you're going to add, whether it's Dropbox or whether it's these line of business apps, they're all going to be behind that. So as long as that's done properly, you integrate everything else, and it's very simple from there. Relatively speaking.
Right. So just to kind of parrot your words back, right? So start with secure identity, right, for your people, and all other services, SaaS services, apps, what have you, are then essentially protected by that foundational service of secure identity, right? So now,
100%.
another way of saying this is, what you don't want, and I think this is what you mean, is you don't want to be creating separate user accounts for every different service, because you may end up easily with 40, 50 different services, right?
100%. And then you're going to end up with problems where your users are going to have trouble remembering the passwords. Sure, they should use a password manager and we can make that whole thing. But essentially, they're going to end up doing silly things. The passwords are similar. And with this, you really focus on this one thing. I mean, you can go passwordless now. You can get rid of the password altogether, right? You can go full passwordless with a hardware token or whatever. The idea, though, is that you secure that identity. And then if we want to get real fancy, you can add some kind of SOC services to that and, have it being monitored. Again, you're talking about the user. So obviously the MSP is going to recommend that they're going to work with, but
so
that's the next step.
Some key parts here is onboarding, right? So new employee onboarding, pretty simple. And then adding them to sort of your approved services list is key. Likewise, making sure that they're not adding unapproved services, which sometimes can be used for ransomware and other attacks, is important. But another often overlooked challenge that this solves is offboarding, right?
Yes, that's the big one. That's really the big one.
Talk through that use case, and just pretend you're talking to a business exec, and you're trying to pitch them on why they start with identity, and they're hiring employees, and unfortunately, sometimes employees have to leave. What is that like with offboarding, and how does Entra ID kind of solve for that?
Yeah, so historically, you would have had a checklist. You have to remove them from this, that, and the other thing, and everything else. And maybe, hopefully not, but maybe when you were onboarding new applications and you didn't have centralized identity management, you might have forgot to add something to your list. So there's a possibility that you could offboard somebody, but still have left them with access to some random application. And if they were leaving because of bad reasons, that could be a real problem. And even if they weren't leaving for bad reasons, right? Even if they weren't, though, having that out there and forgetting about it is a point of entry. So when you have everything centralized, user is leaving, disable user access to everything, revoke all sessions, done. I mean, you can do the cleanup later, but done.
This is such an important conversation, and sometimes I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often at these Ask events. Is honestly, the smallest MSP needs to know how to do this, right? Because just about every business has this issue that they need to solve for, and if they're not doing foundational items like secure identity, they're going to end up possibly in a world of trouble, right?
100%. And we do have at the ASCII events, we do have the members only meeting that we get. I run the one in Toronto, and that particular meeting, we go over some of this sort of stuff. But you're right. You kind of end up in this thing where the more mature MSPs have been doing it for a long time, and they kind of go off on their own. But no, you're 100% correct. If I could get one thing across to people, it's that how important. Not just having the centralized identities, but managing it. So, like I said, building out the security foundation on it, monitoring it, and expanding on it. That's everything these days.
So while we're there, right, and we're using this, maybe we should give this guy a name, or this business type a name. What are the foundational? So you said let's start with identity, but I want to focus on security, which identity is part of, right? What are the other foundational pieces of security that you would advise, say an ASCII group where someone's starting and you're like, hey man, here's where you start. You need to provide these 5 things, whatever it might be. Like, how do you talk about that?
Yeah, so you're going to start with your identity management. And again, we're Microsoft Shop, so there's going to be a bias there where I'm going to say use Microsoft 365. Is there other options or things you can layer on top? Absolutely. Duo and all Okta. There's lots of things, but pick something.
Sure.
Pick something. So you've got that in place. Now the next step is you want to get some eyes on that. Even if you're a decent sized MSP, you're probably not running 24/7 365. And even if you are, you're probably not running a SOC that's 24/7 365. Yep. If you are, bless your heart, that's amazing. But most aren't. So you're going to want to add some kind of SOC tool on top of that. Whether it's, I guess we're naming names here. So if that's okay, then
sure.
You're going to go, okay. So like in our case, we like Huntress, but there's Blackpoint and there's crowds. There's lots of options out there. But basically you're going to want somebody to have eyes on that identity. And, if there's any suspicious or strange behavior happening, I mentioned conditional access earlier and geo-locking, which is great. You can only log in from Canada or the US or whatever country your staff are in. Maybe you have staff overseas, However, somebody could be using a VPN and trying to override that if it's a targeted attack, right? It works great, like keeping the front door locked to your house, right? As well as keeping out the honest people. But if somebody's really trying to get in, they're going to have a bump key, so you got to have somebody watch it. So we add that on. And then when you get beyond that, that's when you're going to want something, like a ThreatMate type of product where you're going to want to then be monitoring the setup, and you're going to be wanting to, being able to prove that your setup, these conditional access types of things I mentioned are actually at a level they should be. And the clients, well, there's co-managed situations where the clients are extremely technical, and we have a lot of those clients ourselves. The vast majority are going to be more business type clients. And so you want to give them something really simple that they can understand, without all the gobbledygook technical information. And so something like, ThreatMate has these really nice executive reports, which we're able to pull and we're able to show clients and say, hey, here's the things we have in place. There's a numerical score they can look at, and even before you get to that point, you've got the Microsoft score, which is something. I have some issues with the way that's calculated, but that's where, like I said, having something that demonstrates you're doing what you should be is very critical.
Well, when we talk about, Microsoft 365, and you're right, most small businesses start there and stay there, and they have a way of, upgrading over time as well. But if you think about it, right, almost everything they do for their business that's digital will be in that ecosystem, right?
100%. Yep.
Email, collaboration tools, SharePoint / OneDrive, right? Certainly the underlying cloud infrastructure like Azure, you mentioned Entra, all of that, if you think about it, that's your business, right? If you're talking about a law office, right? I mean, you don't want anything on those laptops. Essentially, you want it all in a place that can be shared and collaborated on with everything else. So that does form the major attack surface for these small businesses. And going back to your SBS example, right? So I think there's a rare thing going on here in cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is complex. There's a lot of tooling, of course, and a lot to learn and understand. But because I would say because most of the attack surface for these small businesses is in fact Microsoft 365 and all the services that come with it, I would say if you can get your arms around that and your eyes on it. So where ThreatMate comes in, of course, is what are the specific exposures that you may have left open? Things like you've got a global admin without MFA, right? Or you have this user has auto forwarding enabled, right? Why? And we chose the US CISA standard called Scuba Gear, which is fairly prescriptive, right? And not everyone needs that level of security that's mandated for US federal agencies, but at least what the high bar is, right? And again, our hypothesis is get your arms around M365 security, start with the high bar in what is absolutely secure, and then work your way down as needed. Like you mentioned, conditional access. Not everyone can be restricted to one geo, for example, right? So that tends to be more of a, what's the right fit for the client as an example. But I do think it's an opportunity to actually secure, the major part of the attack surface for a client is by looking at M365 security baselines. Any
100%.
thoughts on that as an attack surface?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, at the risk of having this sound like a piece from the History Channel, when we were talking about SBS, the attack surface was the perimeter, right? So we had a firewall, we had a server, and we had a bunch of desktops. And sometimes we didn't even have laptops. I can't tell you how many clients I had who said, no, we work at work. We don't need laptops. And so they would literally only have computers in the office. And so obviously you had the old-fashioned risk of somebody bringing in a floppy disk or then thumb drives later, and it was full of malware. Right, ignoring that risk, though, generally you had to target that IP address of that company, whereas now, like you're talking about 365, it's everybody's there, so it's a much easier front door to locate. Breaking it down can be a lot more difficult, but finding it is easy. And so your security baselines, that's huge. And you mentioned scuba gear for 365, absolutely. But even other frameworks like the CIS controls and stuff like that for machines, MSPs that aren't sure what to do should do something. So grab onto something. Scuba gear is a great one for this. Like I said, I'm not going to throw the CIS controls. I think are another valid one to look at on the desktops. But do something. And if your clients, if like you said about not everyone needs the same level of security, maybe you got florists as clients, and then maybe you got weapons manufacturers. Maybe they have slightly different levels. Banks, slightly different levels there. But nonetheless, at least if you can do your internal controls at a certain level and say, this is what we recommend, this is our baseline for being very secure. If you need to scale it back for selected cases,
So I do think there's an opportunity for MSPs to differentiate themselves, right, from by using CIS or scuba gear, right? But here's my question to you. So is there also an opportunity, I would say there is, to say, look, not only will we manage your M365 and your users and your services, but we'll also ensure that it's secure. Isn't that a service that you can actually offer? Or do you think that's just all part of the package?
Well, I mean, again, depending on how the MSP is doing their thing. I mean, for years now, the best-in-class MSPs are kind of doing an all-in seat price type of deal, and so that's going to be part of that. If you're doing co-managed and raking it out, sorry, go ahead, Patrick. You want to do something on that?
No, go ahead. I'll have a thought after.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I was going to say, the all-in seat price is really where it's at. So, but if you are doing more of a monitoring type of MSP package or an entry-level package, it's absolutely a way you could add on. But I think, you mentioned ASCII before and how all MSPs should be doing this sort of thing. I have found that the MSPs that show up at those events, ASCII being a big one, obviously, that I'm part of, but other ones as well, they're the ones that are trying to figure out how to be better and how to do it. The ones where, you hear the name or, maybe I'm bidding for some business and customers collecting quotes and, one of the other people, I've never heard of them ever. Not always the case, but often the case, like they're living under a rock. They're not out there trying to they might not be in my circle, and that's totally fine too, but some circle, you gotta be in some circle. If all you're doing is living by yourself under a rock, reading news feeds or something, you're probably missing a few things.
Yeah. So I guess I had a couple questions. I think there's two different points I want to maybe elaborate on. So you talked about, these circles having a much more stronger security process. How would you say that your clients have perceived? How has that changed? I should say how your clients have perceived the value of your services.
Yeah. So I will preface by saying that a company that has poor technical controls and poor technical implementation, but amazing salespeople can still do really well financially on the front end. I don't really like that style of business, but if we're talking about, it is what it is. So from a client perception standpoint, obviously that's part of it. Where we leverage the circles that we run in, though, is the coverage. So the really small MSPs, the 1-2-man shops, the old question is, what happens if you get run over by a bus? Well, some of them say, well, then, my wife is just going to call Chad and he's going to his team's going to step in and help. That's a legitimate thing we have with even some decent sized MSPs, and it goes both ways.
Sure.
We have places to go. The other way, though, is also, I mentioned those clients across the country. Well, clearly, I don't have staff across the country. I mean, I shouldn't say clearly. Maybe I do, but I don't. But I do have peers across the country. And so I can easily get boots on the ground in Vancouver this afternoon if I needed. I can get boots on the ground outside of Calgary or Edmonton this afternoon, no problem. And likewise, there's MSPs out there that could get it in Toronto, same thing. So I would say that's really where it is. The sharing examples is another one. I think this is a really critical one. There's a level of vulnerability, and I don't mean vulnerability in the ThreatMate assessment side, but on the being vulnerable as a business owner, sharing, hey, listen, this really bad thing happened. This is what happened to us. This is how we handled it. These are things we could have done differently. And then sharing that with your peers makes your peers stronger. And when they do the same thing for you, it overall builds the group up, which is my actual answer to your point.
Fair enough. So I guess, pivoting to a slightly different question, how have as you've been getting better visibility into clients' environments, how has that changed the way that you prospect or structure new agreements?
Oh, that's a good question. So when we structure new agreements, we're a little loose on the device counts. And I find that it all kind of comes out in the wash. Now, I have encountered a 10-person SaaS company that had like 150 servers. Okay, I have seen that. Clearly, they're not getting priced at a 10-user all-in seat price type of deal. Right. But as a general rule of thumb, for a general type of business, finding a bunch of extra printers or something like that, we do list all those things on there. So has it impacted it? It gives us more clarity in what to expect, and it simplifies the onboarding process. I would say that's probably the biggest thing. One of the challenges we've had in the past is you send in your slick sales guy, whether it's the owner or somebody else, and they go in, they do an assessment, everything, and then it gets handed over to onboarding. And this is where there's a bit of a problem, because if you send in the, I'll make like a joke, like the pocket protector, tech type of guy who's not particularly great at talking to the clients, having him go in before you've got the deal sometimes can do more harm than good if he starts saying things, like to the client, in front of the client. And so it's better to control that a little bit. But when you flip it over to them and they have to start dealing with it, them not having as much information because it's notes that were made or scans that were done by a salesperson, not as good. So when you can get in there and you can get more information up front as part of the prospecting, you have a better, more clear picture. Yes, it does help with the quoting and making sure that you're on track. But more importantly, makes a smoother onboarding, which in my opinion, one of the most challenging things about being an MSP is not so much finding net new business, although of course that's it's not easy. But once you get in there, that first 3 months where they're expecting you to know everything the outgoing guy did and all that weird stuff, and maybe depending on how we've had a few, more than a few. We've had some where it's been great. They've transitioned, sent us run books, all the information. It's been wonderful. And then we've had some where it was toxic and the reason for the parting was not good. We try to make sure that we're always the MSP handing over all the run books and everything. And, we're overly friendly because it's a small world. It's a small world.
Exactly.
Yeah. When it comes to security and talking to clients or prospects, right? So ThreatMate, of course, lives, breathes, eats, drinks security, and we think everyone should, right? But the reality is everyone is very cost conscious, right? And every time either you add a new tool to the stack, obviously you don't want to be paying for that at a high. So you've got to sell this to your clients as well. Is that a hard argument in this day and age? Or do you find people are pretty receptive? And what is that conversation like? What tends to work when you're explaining either to a client where you're trying to upgrade their security or to a prospect to get them onto your security tech stack? How do those conversations go, and what seems to work and what doesn't seem to work?
That's a great question. I think one of the issues historically has been that a lot of enterprise tools have tried to slide into the SMB space. And, I joked a few years ago that if I tried and I just acted like a tech and not like a business guy and just picked all the things that I thought were great and slammed them into my stack of things I wanted to use, I could be at $400 a user per month,
Sure.
which is hilarious and obviously not at all. We have, and I definitely won't name these tools, but there are a couple vendors right now that I would love to use their products, but I can't justify the ROI on putting the tool into our model. So even though their product is great, it's just not right. And so when you're talking about a tool like ThreatMate, one of the problems we have in the industry right now, and you guys have done a good job at solving a bit of this, is there's this sprawl where everything overlaps and everything. You've got this vendor. I don't want to name any names, so we'll just say they're selling bread today, and then tomorrow they're asking if you want an oil change on your car, and the next day they're selling helicopters, and I'm like, but I was buying my bread from you. Why? I don't want a helicopter. And so the thing is that what ThreatMate's done a very good job of is, as you've added functionality to the product, you've kept it all within the right realm. So a great example is, the DCAM, the SPF monitoring, that kind of stuff. It's like an aside, but that's a whole product category. And now we're able to say, no, we don't need to pay for that. We've got ThreatMate. So it gives, more weight there. And then you mentioned, the scuba gear stuff, being able to have those models in place. Well, now we don't have to pay somebody to build these models internally or to implement them. We can then leverage that. So the more value we're able to drive out of it, and tools like ThreatMate, you guys came at this with the right intentions, targeting the MSP market, the way the tool's laid out, the fact that you can have, many childs of a parent, in our case, we've been able to set up entire divisions and things like that. It really hits the box. So when you're talking about cost is such a relative term, and it's absolutely important. And I'm not downplaying cost is very important. But when you can build it in a way where it just naturally fits and it replaces a whole bunch of other things that make sense, not out in left field, I think it makes it a much easier conversation. And for us anyway, we build it into our offering.
Well, certainly really appreciate the kind words there about the ThreatMate platform. Philosophically, how we approach, so we're not selling you bread and then a helicopter, is, we say, look, we're going to approach the analysis of the attack surface like an adversary would. And so the example I use is say you're a vulnerability management tool, right? Your job in life is to find software vulnerabilities and report on them and prioritize them and help your clients focus on which vulnerabilities should you patch, right? But if I have, as an example, Telnet or worse, RDP on an external server that is patched and updated, right?
Right.
I'm not reporting that if my tool is vulnerability management, right?
Yeah, you're saying we shouldn't port forward 3389 to the internet? Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So that's where the point is, maybe that's a different service. I'm not sure, but we just say, look, if it's left to boom, meaning if there's something I can proactively do to get ahead of the adversary, I want to find it and I want to call it out. And that does include SPF and DMARC, right? That does include analyzing insecure services that you're advertising to the internet. And it does include analyzing user accounts for insecure configuration, third-party SaaS apps. Going back to SBS, the nice part about SBS, it sounds like it was relatively static. You had a set of services with M365, good and bad. Good in that everything is in one cloud service. Bad is that users can arbitrarily start adding more software to this cloud service if you let them, right? So these things do require continuous monitoring, but at least you can turn to one platform to look at all of that attack surface, and more importantly, just tell you what's the most important of these things to take action on, right? So it might turn out that global admin with the MFA is far more important than that 9.8 CVE on an internal facing laptop. Who cares, right? So that's sort of how we approach that problem. And the reason we're not selling you a helicopter yet is because we're not in the write-a-boom lane where we're telling you, and by the way, not only was this adversary, not only was his exposure there, but an adversary exploited it, is now on the network running amok. That's where your Huntress, to your example, comes in, right?
Right.
What we will do, though, is in advance of that is the pen test side, right? So we will run those automated pen test simulations to tell you, if you don't take care of that CVE, here's how an adversary could exploit that to get to. So again, left to boom, tell you the what if scenarios, why you should take care of this one versus that one, so that you don't get in the scenario where you get that 2 a.m. call, right? That there's an adversary on the network.
100%. I love the thought process behind it, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. The other one is, you kind of briefly touched on it with the pen testing, but like websites. 10 years ago, websites were informational, and aside from e-commerce sites and stuff. But yeah, I won't mention any specific reports. But the one thing with the websites though is that cyber policies, the insurance companies, we've been having these conversations in the last several years.
Yeah.
Even when we were getting customers secured with Cyber Secure Canada, which was required for some federal government funded organizations, they said, listen, if your customer has people going to their website and their website is infected with who knows what, and they're picking things up, that is a problem. That is a problem. And it sounds simple to say, but it never was a problem in the past. And now that's part of the business. So for us, we've made a whole thing out of that. We have a whole managed service on managed web hosting, and it's not, sign them up for a reseller hosting and slap them all in there. It's a full managed thing.
Chad, I have some news for you. Breaking news for you.
Oh, I'm excited.
Chad, so Patrick doesn't know this. Chad was the guy that turned me on to OWASP Top 10. He said, please, for your pen testing, can you please build out an OWASP Top 10 service? So go ahead, Patrick. I'm going to dish this off to you. Here's the pass. Go do the layup.
Yeah. So Chad, so the short answer is we're working on it. We're going to be so first of all, we're going to be incorporating all of the OWASP top 10 categories into how and when we do scans, and then building a specific report just to summarize all of those scans into one single place, so you can deliver that to your customers. Because to your point, this is one of the new attack surfaces, right? It's slightly different from other attack surfaces, but it's definitely one of the new attack surfaces. So delivering that, OWASP does a great job at being very prescriptive, just like Scuba, right? It's very prescriptive around the types of problems to look for. So we want to take that and give you a report that provides you a summary.
That'll be phenomenal, because we're engaging on a regular basis with auditors where they're saying, we need this. It's one of the domains. And right now we're doing our own little thing. But if we have this part of it, what we want to do is we want to say, Mr. Auditor, here is where we believe we were at. Feel free to run your own scans, do what you have to do. And I find that really sets the tone for the conversation. And we're able to be a lot more constructive in working together.
So we'll sign you up. We'll sign you up to be an early test user.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
We'll definitely early, and we can even show you some samples pretty soon too.
Wonderful. That's amazing. Thank you, guys.
By the way, one of the things I like about OWASP Top 10, which is right in line with the scuba gear, right, is security is one of those funny things that you don't know you have it until you're proven that you don't, right?
Right.
And that's where like all the write-a-boom stuff is, everything's peachy keen until it's not. Right now, everything's an emergency. Left to boom, where you're analyzing attack surfaces, there's actually an opportunity to prove you have some level of security.
Right.
I don't mean to say you're secure, but you have some level of security, and that's where these frameworks come in. So Scuba Gear, once again, a framework that the U.S. Cybersecurity Agency established, is that here's what we call secure. Now, buy it or not, but that's their framework, and we can analyze M365 according to that framework. Another good one you mentioned was CIS. Another good one is NIST CSF for all your security stack. For web services, we like OWASP, I guess because you introduced it. But the reason we like OWASP is because it tells you these are the top 10 categories of how web services tend to get exploited, right? Doesn't mean it's 100%, but if you capture completeness on these 10, you've got most of it, right? Yep. And as I like to tell our team, negative results are good, right? So a negative result is like, I tested this and you were not susceptible to this exploitation type. That's a negative result, which turns out to be good, right? So even being able to analyze a website, and we believe in stoplight dashboards, right? So green's all the way down, even if you didn't find anything, still has very important value to that client. And obviously, if you find some yellows or reds, you're now able to go in and go fix that, which is good, right? So we'll have that. We'll Patrick now knows you're the guy. I guess I should have mentioned it to him sooner. That kind of put that bug in my ear last year, right? Yep. But I'm really proud of this, and it's actually the direction we're going through our pen testing. Is we tend to talk about automated pen testing as if it's some sort of monolith, right? But the reality is it's different tests for every different attack surface. So we're now generating different reports for every different attack surface. You know about M365. You now know about the web services OWASP top 10. We'll be doing one for Azure. We'll be doing one for firewalls, right? As we start going through these, you'll have individualized reports for each of these attack surfaces that you can now say, you've got this sonic wall firewall. We know that historically the vulnerabilities that A, firewalls have, and B, that sonic wall has. We ran the set of pen tests. These are these tests, and here's what came back. You're all good, right? That gives me the ability to speak positively towards that. We did in fact exercise it against a set of tests that we know bad guys would run, and you're getting out in front of it. So a little bit of a heads up there, but I'm glad because I remember last year you're like, hey man, if you could do this, it'd be huge for us.
It really is. Like I said, it's you mentioned like when we keep going back to the frameworks, but these frameworks are not some arbitrary thing where you and Patrick sat in a room looking at 365 options, going, we should probably. So the thing is that when you have these standardized sets, everybody's working off the same page, and so regardless of which audit, which side, which security, whatever you're looking at, like there are different ones for different countries and things. There's always kind of these underlying foundational pieces, OWASP being a good example of one. And as long as you can go against that, where you stand. And like you said, like that's the whole left the boom argument you're making, is understanding where you're at. Nothing's 100%. And that's not what we're trying to do. I mean, it'd be wonderful, great, sure, but that's not realistic. We live in
any other. So Patrick runs product for ThreatMate. Any other gems you want to leave out, breadcrumbs you want to leave out for us while we're here? Like, hey, go build this, please, because we'd love that.
Well, honestly, the DKIM, the whole thing there, that was like a nice surprise. Like one day when I woke up and saw the release notes on that, because not to disparage any of the products out there that are selling it as a service or whatever, but we've never really, again, back to that, building that $400 a user stack, right? We just never saw the value in that because we set them up and and there you go. And in your case, I mean, if you have an MSP that's not familiar with setting up proper DNS records for mail, you're telling them like it's great. Like I said, the OWASP report's huge. The other one, and I know you guys are already working on this, so we'll just throw it out there. The new report, your new reports, the prospecting reports, your new reports are gorgeous. They're amazing, and I can't wait till all of the reports look like the new reports because
you're right. You're right.
Yep.
Yeah.
In your perfect world, Chad, what level of reporting would you give your customers on a regular basis, and kind of tell me why, and maybe the thought process and kind of how you talk to them about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you have to understand first that I have a couple different customer levels. So I do have the co-managed customers where I have IT people on the other side. So for those, giving them a technical report is wonderful. The same sort of report my staff would want to see. But when we're talking about general business owners or executive directors, general managers, I really want a really shiny, nice executive summary that in the first couple pages it says everything is great. Hopefully, everything's great. Or not. Okay, everything's great. And then basically, if there's 30 more pages of reasons why, and with lots of explanation, that's great. but I don't want them to have to read 30 pages. They need to just, and what we want to do with these is we want to use them as kickoffs. We'll bring them to a meeting. We'll send it in advance to a meeting. We'll say, hey, we're going to be having a meeting where we're talking about the stuff in this report. Some of them will read it. Some of them won't. Some of them will skim it. But I can usually count them to at least open it and look at that first, and if it's
first page or two.
Exactly. And as long as it's got something to kind of catch them, and if you're talking about the Sonic Wall, for example, right? So we do a lot of Fortinet, we have some other stuff out there from some acquisitions, and being able to look at those, for example, and say, here's some things, here's where you're at, that even if it's just reassuring, it's a great excuse to have a touch point with a client.
Yeah, so if you look at the prospecting report, as one of the things it does is covers all the different attack surfaces and kind of gives you that stoplight framework, right? And so in their case, Fortinet, good. That's a great conversation starter. I guess one question I have is when you look at how you used to communicate risk to clients versus now, and what feels different in the conversations you're having? And you can look at that over the past couple of years or whatever time frame you'd like. But I'd love to hear how you talk about risk, how that's evolved over the past couple of years.
Oh, that's a doozy of one. Yeah. So, and this kind of goes back to, if we're talking about the good old days, the good old days, what the expectation was that we made their life easy, everything ran, they just trusted we were taking care of everything. Now they're getting bombarded with information. They're getting, threats. We're having to try and explain to people, obviously we have cybersecurity awareness training. That's a big key part of it. But we're constantly trying to like, for example, we had a problem in the last year. We had a client where the accounts receivable was sent out to a third party. There was no hack. It was social engineering. So, okay, right. But it was literally a display name that was changed on a Gmail address. Like it was literally that. And there was no malicious links in it. There was nothing that with a spam filter could have done better on that, so to speak. It was very just a plain text type of email. And the user just sent out everything, and then it created this huge problem. And then we're dealing with management explaining that, well, I understand that it's a technology, it's not a technology problem, it's a user problem. And so at that point, they had been resistant to cyber awareness training. That was the catalyst, obviously, to get that in there. But even then, this is what I mean by I said more stress, so I'll say the same thing again. I don't have much more hair to lose here, but the thing is that if people ask me what I did, I help people. Now I don't feel like I help people anymore. I prevent people from harming themselves, and then we have a damage control plan when the proverbial gun in the holster accidentally shoots them in the foot. We then have a plan to remediate that so they don't bleed out on the floor. And I'd be lying if I said that this is not more fun. I mean, but it's definitely a bigger need. I feel like we were a want at one point in the past. There was a point in time where doing things manually on paper was a valid option, and moving it to a digital thing, like that was a thing, right? And it was like a luxury. And now these aren't luxuries; these are requirements.
That's a great point. So on that, so I think that's a really fun example. Can you think of an example where ThreatMate found something that changed how your client understood their risk, or kind of maybe unstuck a conversation?
Yeah, sure. So this is really where having a lower tier of Office plan. One of our things over the last couple of years we've had quite a bit of success with is moving people off of the M365 standard type of thing over to Business Premium, right? Well, I'd love everyone to be on E5, or even Business Premium with the E5 add-on. That is a bit of a hard sell. The biggest issue we had going from standard to Business Premium, of course, is there's nothing tangible. There's nothing they can touch. I mean, unless we're talking about doing autopilot or something with Intune and having laptop. But no, but whereas it was like, hey, you have basic, now you have standard, now you have desktop apps. Like it's a tangible thing, right? And so with using ThreatMate, we're able to show them, look, you have these security gaps and you can't enable them because you don't have the license to address these problems. And that is a way that we're able to get buy-in on the upgrade. That's a big one for us.
Interesting.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to leave it there. I've got to say, Chad, it was really fascinating starting out the conversation with your roots as a 15-year-old. I'm willing to bet you had some newspaper articles about that whiz kid 15-year-old who started a business. So pretty amazing career. Congrats for a great year. Obviously, the recognition is building up. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk about how ThreatMate helps you solve some of the security challenges of your client. And again, love having you a customer and some of the breadcrumbs you dropped for us that we're eventually following up on. And we will give you early access to our OWASP Top 10 service. Look forward to getting some feedback from you on that one.
Yep, that sounds great.
I appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Chad. Take care.
Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you guys can stay on for a minute and recording.